Since I was old enough to understand, I was taught to walk with my spine straight, my chin slightly raised, and my heart carefully hidden. My name, Valyria Solenne, didn't truly belong to me. It was an insignia, a banner raised amidst the cold halls of America's old elite. Wherever I went, my presence carried decades of political alliances, arranged marriages, multi-million-dollar donations, and an empire of impeccable appearances, built on silent pacts and strategic smiles. I grew up in a mansion that felt more like a mausoleum. Furniture too pristine to be touched, words too measured to sound human, and parents too busy to notice that their daughter, beneath all that polish, was imploding inside. I dressed for editorials, posed for magazines, smiled for social campaigns, and yet no one saw that behind the custom-designed dresses and inherited jewels, there was a girl trapped in a display case where even the air was rationed. By 17, I already knew my hand would be used as currency. By 22, they were choosing my fiancé as if closing a corporate deal. Everything was decided by a council. Even my lipstick seemed to be voted on. I attended gala dinners like a porcelain doll adorning the room, always in the right place, saying the right words, feeling everything wrong. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was a mute exhaustion, a void so well concealed that not even the photographers could capture it. My father said that women of our lineage had a historic mission to maintain balance. What he didn't say, but always implied, was that balance in that house meant submission with glamour. And any disruption, a gesture off script, an emotional slip, a lingering glance at someone not on the approved list, was treated as institutional betrayal. By then I had trained myself to disappear. My gaze drifted inward. My voice was soft, measured, diplomatic. But there was a world beyond those walls that provoked me. Sometimes, when my engagements ended early, I'd slip into the back seat of the car, lower the window just a bit, and ask the driver to take a detour through neighborhoods my parents pretended didn't exist. I'd watch the faint lights, the simple facades, the children playing with makeshift toys, and curiously, happier than any child I'd seen at philanthropy events. There was life there, raw reality, yes, but alive. And I in that cushioned seat, dressed in silk and surrounded by silence, felt hollow, like a soulless replica of something that might once have been human. It didn't start with rebellion, nor with courage. The truth is, I reached a point where I kept breathing only because I didn't know how to stop. I was on the verge of a surrender so quiet that even the tabloids wouldn't notice. But it was precisely in that gap between resignation and boredom, in that void where the soul screams without sound, that something, or rather someone, crossed my path. And without knowing it, sparked a flame where there had only been ashes. He appeared like a script error, a slip in an event rehearsed down to the last detail. The invitation was for the grand opening of a public library, a charitable act, Maiki. Family's foundation loved to promote to keep its image clean and its taxes lighter. I was supposed to smile, cut the ribbon, pose with pre-selected children, and deliver a speech written by some aide who'd never set foot in a public school. But that day, there was a delay, a glitch in the organization, and, to fill the gap, someone decided to let a local artist take the stage for a few minutes. That's how Ezra appeared. He didn't wear a suit. He didn't bow to formalities. He dressed like he owed nothing to the world and spoke like he didn't need permission to exist. His eyes didn't seek approval. He began telling stories. Urban legends, ancestral tales, fragments of his own life woven with myths that sounded absurd and magical at once. The audience was split between enchantment and unease, but I stopped breathing. Not because he was handsome, though he was with a raw beauty that doesn't grace magazine covers, but because for the first time in ages, someone spoke with truth. Every word came from his mouth as if rooted in his chest. There was no filter, no political agenda, no mask, just raw truth, spoken with an open heart and a restless soul. As he spoke, I felt something stir inside me, a part I thought had died years ago. It wasn't a romantic impulse, it was recognition, as if two exiled souls had briefly met at the intersection of parallel worlds. And the moment our eyes locked, for a fleeting second, I knew he saw me. Not as Valyria Solenne, the heiress of an empire, the urban princess of fashion editorials. He saw me. And that look, so simple and devastating, was more intimate than all the arranged kisses I'd been forced to endure at parties and social obligations. After the event, I broke protocol. I made up an excuse, slipped away from the security detail. I wanted to see him again, even if just for 5 minutes. I walked to the back of the library, and there he was, sitting on a concrete step, sketching something in a worn notebook. When I approached, he didn't stand, didn't offer a fake smile, didn't feign surprise. He just looked at me, as if he'd been expecting me, as if he knew that sooner or later the caged girl would come to him. "I didn't think you'd show," he said, with a calm that dismantled every armor I'd worn my entire life. "Neither did I," I replied. And there, sitting side by side, with no cameras, no audience, no obligations, I was just Valyria. And he was just Ezra. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. I never planned to kiss him. Not then, not ever. It wasn't a rehearsed act, nor did it carry the intent of defiance or the romance of old movies. It happened because it was inevitable, like rain held back by clouds that finally give way under their own weight. We spent weeks meeting in secret, in the gaps I carved out between commitments, inventing meetings and canceling public appearances. There were never promises between us, just presence. Ezra listened to me like no one ever dared. He didn't interrupt, didn't explain my feelings to me, didn't try to shape me. He just listened with attentive eyes, and his whole soul surrendered. By his side, my breath was mine, my skin was mine, and even my name felt lighter. For the first time, I existed outside the frame they'd painted me into since childhood. But no freedom lasts long without a cost. The foundation organized a new event in a public square to celebrate the expansion of a social project bearing my mother's name. I was there out of obligation, as always, surrounded by cameras and speeches. That meant nothing. Ezra was invited to perform, a courtesy no one understood, but someone had approved. Maybe the universe was conspiring, or maybe chaos was just impatient. He took the stage, and as he began to speak, something in me knew it would be different. It wasn't just his voice, it was his gaze. It was the way each word seemed stitched with something deeper. It was the way he looked at me in the crowd and said, with utter clarity, "There are truths no one can hide behind a surname. I didn't think. I didn't weigh the consequences. I didn't calculate the impact. I descended the steps, crossed the space between us, and stood before him like someone crossing an abyss without knowing if there'd be ground on the other side. The world around us ceased to exist, and I kissed him. It wasn't a timid kiss. It was a full, defiant, gloriously imperfect kiss. A kiss from someone who didn't apologize for being herself. And in that moment, time shattered. The audience froze. The photographers fired their flashes like gunshots. My mother paled at the back of the stage. The council was in shock. But Ezra just held my face with both hands, as if the entire world fit there. And I understood. There was no going back. When the kiss ended, the silence was louder than any scream. I looked around and saw the scandal forming like a storm. But inside me there was calm, a dense, steady calm, the kind we only feel when we stop running. And then, as if an ancient cycle had finally broken, I took Ezra's hand in front of everyone and stepped off the stage with him, not as the princess of the Solenne Empire, but as a woman who, by kissing a commoner, chose to change her world. The stay. Headlines came before I could even change out of my dress. On the way home, still tasting the kiss on my lips and feeling Ezra's hand entwined with mine, the security team's phones buzzed like silent sirens. Solenne Empire princess kisses commoner in public. Scandal in high society, Solenne. Daughter breaks protocol. The words trampled my reputation like an old rug. The car stopped before reaching the mansion's gates. A entourage awaited at the entrance, faces rigid as stone, eyes burning with controlled fire. My mother didn't say a word. My father, on the phone with someone from the council, gave me a look I'd never seen before. Not anger, fear of what I now represented. Because the kiss wasn't just a breach of etiquette. It was a signal, a fire ignited at the heart of an empire of appearances. I was dragged into the house like a criminal. My phones were confiscated. All my engagements were cancelled. My face vanished from campaigns. My name, once a symbol of elegance and tradition, was now a problem to be contained. Ezra, meanwhile, was treated like an intruder. The press began digging into his life with animalistic fury. They found old jobs, family debts, decontextualized videos. They tried to turn him into a threat, an opportunist, a fraud. They tried to dehumanize him and, by extension, ridicule me. The narrative was clear. A spoiled heiress, lost, seduced, by a man with no past, no pedigree, no standing for her position. But none of it hurt like it used to, because now I knew what was true, and no lie, no matter how well packaged, could erase what my eyes had seen. The days that followed were a domestic war zone. I was summoned to closed-door meetings where my mother wept silently, and my father spoke of irreparable damage to the family's image. They offered me a way out, a press conference, an apology, a statement written by aides, and Ezra's voluntary exile, a small price to restore order. I sat before them and listened in silence. Then I said, with the same calm I'd felt stepping off the stage, "I won't lie again just because you're comfortable with lies." They looked at me as if I'd chosen death. And maybe, in a way, I had killed the daughter they'd raised, but in her place, a woman was born, one no one could mold anymore. As my old world crumbled, the people outside began to speak. Young people, women, ordinary workers, people who'd never had a voice in the Solenne city, started writing to me, small messages, letters, notes left discreetly in public places. Many said what they saw on that stage was like a sign, a reminder that even the oldest structures can crack. And that's when I realized the kiss was more than mine. It didn't just change my life, it began to change the kingdom. The persecution didn't come from just one side, it was a siege. While the media turned me into a symbol of decadence, the very walls I'd grown up in began to crumble from within. Aunts, godparents, old family friends avoided me in public, sent curt messages in private, saying they loved me despite the mistake. But I knew it wasn't love they offered, but control disguised as concern. My accounts were frozen under the pretext of security, cards blocked, invitations revoked. Even my room was emptied while I still slept in it. They surrounded me with silence, expecting me to back down. But there was something they hadn't yet understood. I'd already lost everything that kept me captive. And for the first time, I was free. Ezra became the target of a smear campaign. Investigative reports insinuated he'd approached me for personal gain, that he'd manipulated my emotions. They dug into his childhood, gaps in his resume, small mistakes from his youth. They tried to reduce a whole man to a shallow headline. And yet, he didn't retreat. He kept writing, telling stories in small squares, gathering people around his voice. What started with a timid audience became a movement. Ordinary people, tired of being forgotten, began to listen to him, and in listening to him, they began to hear themselves too. We met in secret, far from cameras, far from the city. He told me the love we shared was only possible because I'd chosen to live authentically. I listened in silence, knowing every word he spoke was a risk we took together. One of those nights, he showed me a box with over 100 letters, all from people who'd seen the kiss and wrote to say thank you. Most didn't even know us, but they felt something had been broken there, something bigger than the two of us, as if by refusing to pretend, I'd allowed others to stop pretending too. Meanwhile, inside the Solenne house, chaos masqueraded as normalcy. My father met with lawyers. My mother feigned trips to avoid questions. The council, once united, began to fracture. Some believed the damage to the public image was irreparable. Others in secret sought me out. They said they saw in me a chance to change something. One of them, an old advisor, who'd known me since I was a child, held my hand with teary eyes and said, "You didn't bow. That's never happened before, and that changes everything." In the quiet of a city accustomed to rigid structures, a new foundation was being born. A foundation made of voices, courage, and simple truths. And at the center of it all, unintentionally, was me, the daughter of an empire, transformed by a man who never wore armor but fought with words that healed. The day I officially broke with my family wasn't marked by shouts or slamming doors. It was worse. It was absolute silence, the kind of silence that echoes through the halls of a house that, for decades, mistook tradition for tyranny. I received a printed letter, notarized, delivered by a messenger who didn't even look me in the eye. In cold paragraphs, it outlined my formal dismissal from the Solenne Foundation, the loss of legal rights to the family name, the cancellation of my inheritance, and the immediate removal from all my positions. A dry signature from my mother. At the bottom, not a comma of affection, not a personal word, just the clear message that by loving someone from outside, I'd become a foreigner too. I stood there, motionless, for minutes. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I just felt, as if the links of an invisible chain bound to my ankle since the cradle had finally snapped. I was alone, but for the first time, it was a clean solitude. My former life had collapsed, but not into gray, mournful ruins. It was like a forest burned from within, where the first leaves were beginning to sprout, and in the midst of it all was Ezra. He was waiting for me on the steps of a small community center, holding 2 coffees and that smile that never asked permission to calm me. I sat beside him, handed him the letter, and said only, "It's over." He read it, took a deep breath, and replied, "No, it's begun." The days that followed were like crossing a battlefield barefoot. We were threatened, slandered, isolated. But what the Solenne Empire didn't expect was that I wouldn't try to reclaim the throne, because I never wanted it. Instead, I accepted invitations from forgotten neighborhoods, grassroots movements, communities always on the margins of decisions. The woman who once spoke out of obligation now listened out of desire. I found myself in community panels, meetings in cultural centers, rooms filled with real voices, and in each one I found fragments of myself, of who I might have been, had I not been born locked in a stained glass cage. Social media exploded. Some called me ungrateful, a traitor, a spoiled rebel. But others, many others, called me an inspiration. They started using the word the elite feared most, change. And when the press, fishing for another scandal, published a video of Ezra and me dancing in a public square with children from a working-class neighborhood, something unexpected happened. The image didn't spark outrage. It sparked empathy. It sparked a movement. People no longer just wanted to know who I was. They began asking who the Solennes were, what they hid, what they sustained with so many secrets. The foundation was investigated. Old documents surfaced. And without me needing to raise my voice, the wall began to crack. I was no longer a princess. I no longer wore jewels, titles, or privileges. But on every corner, someone recognized me, not for status, but for choice. And despite all the losses, all the risks I knew, I'd won something far greater than a power struggle. I'd won the lie that I couldn't be free. It started with a rumor. An anonymous tip handed to a reporter too ambitious and too unethical. At first we didn't pay attention. We were used to distortions, venomous headlines, videos cut out of context. But this time, it was different. It wasn't just an attempt to discredit us. It was a direct attack, orchestrated with precision to destroy us once and for all. Ezra was accused of involvement in a public fund embezzlement scheme, ironically tied to one of the Solenne Foundation's old contracts. The allegation was absurd, but had the appearance of truth. Forged documents, paid witnesses, and a narrative, ready to be swallowed by those desperate to see us fall. That morning, they knocked on the door of our small apartment as if storming a dangerous hideout. Ezra was taken away in handcuffs, in front of cameras, like a high-profile criminal. I, barred from following, watched from the balcony, fists clenched, heart pounding like an alarm. The press feasted. The headlines returned with renewed fury. The fairy tale is over. The ex-princess and the impostor. I couldn't see him for days. Every attempt hit a wall of bureaucracy and locked doors. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, I received new offers from the council. I could clear my name, reclaim my position, if I distanced myself from him, if I denied everything. But as the pressure mounted, the truth became clearer. I knew who he was. I knew his integrity, his pain, what he'd built with his own hands. And I knew, more than ever, that I wouldn't be the first woman to have her love discredited just because it wasn't convenient. I decided to fight, not for the newspapers, not for public opinion, but for him, for us, and for the truth we'd carried since that first glance. I sought the right allies, people who'd also been wounded by the system but knew how it worked from the inside. We combed through documents, recovered old files, exposed the foundation's shadowy connections. We discovered the accusation was a smokescreen to hide far greater scandals, multi-million-dollar frauds, money laundering, and bribes that had sustained the empire for decades. The truth was ugly, but real. And when it came to light, it wasn't with explosions or fiery speeches. It was with evidence. Ezra was released after 17 days. 17 days in which I slept little, ate less, and fought like never before for someone who never asked for it, but who deserved it. He walked out of the courthouse with tired eyes and a silent soul. When he saw me, he said nothing. He just hugged me. And in that embrace was a mutual confession. We were exhausted but still whole. People expected us to disappear after that the pressure, the scandal, and the invisible violence would break us inside. They expected the kiss to become a memory, our story swallowed by a fresher, more scandalous headline. But what they didn't foresee was that public humiliation had made us unstoppable. After everything we'd lost, all that remained was the essential truth, conviction, and each other. And that was enough to move mountains. When Ezra was cleared, something shifted in the city's air. Not only did public opinion begin to turn in our favor, but the invisible structure upholding power began to crack. The exposed evidence triggered a chain of official investigations. Once untouchable names were summoned to testify. Figures who'd laughed at me in social gatherings now trembled before microphones. The Solenne Empire, that castle of appearances that prided itself on keeping everything under control, finally faced a real earthquake. But we didn't want revenge. We wanted reconstruction. And for that, we had to rise with our hands dirtied by our own fight. We started small, as it always should be. A project of urban storytelling in public schools, where Ezra told stories and listened to the children's. A community fund with grassroots donations to support artists from forgotten neighborhoods. A support network for young people who, like me, no longer wanted to play imposed roles. I no longer had family money or access to old halls of power, but I gained something better. Trust. From real people, from the streets, from those who once saw me as untouchable and now called me by my first name. Once an older man stopped me at the market and said, "Never thought the Solenne girl would buy bread here with us." I smiled and replied, "That's because now I'm one of you too." It wasn't false modesty. It was a truth that bled to be born. Because only those stripped of everything know the value of choosing their own path with their own feet. Ezra said the city was writing a new story, and somehow ours became its prologue. Gradually, authorities began to recognize our projects. They couldn't ignore the public support or the results. We received invitations to speak at universities, political meetings, cultural forums, but we never left the ground we came from, because we knew everything we built now was, at last, ours. I never wore a crown again, but I began to wear my name with pride for the first time. Not as a family crest, but as a living reminder that even the most rigid pillars can bend when confronted with truth. Years have passed since that kiss in the public square. Traditional circles still call it a scandal. Some still whisper my name with the bitter taste of shame. But in the streets, in school hallways, in the hands that hold ours in silence, it's remembered as the kiss that started it all. Ezra and I never wanted a throne. We wanted ground, solid earth where we could walk without masks. And that ground was given to us not by decree, but by the people, by those who saw in us something the elite never did, humanity. Today we walk among them. There are no palaces, there is no gold, but there is purpose, there is life. There are stories being told and retold on every corner. Stories that endure, that inspire, that heal. Stories that no longer need permission to exist. The old Solenne Foundation headquarters was converted into a community center. Ironic, perhaps, but above all, symbolic. There, where decisions were once made behind closed doors by a few men in suits, mothers, teachers, artists, and young leaders now gather to shape a different future. I participate without taking center stage. I learned, through pain, that leading isn't commanding, it's listening, sustaining without vanishing. And Ezra, with his steady voice and calloused hands, keeps narrating. We're no longer headlines, and that's a blessing. Sometimes we sit on the same steps where it all began. The world has changed, and so have we. But in that place, we're still just two who dared to see each other beyond the bars of a surname, who dared to love with eyes wide open, even under threat. The kiss I gave him wasn't just the start of a romance. It was the fall of an old world and the birth of a new one. A kingdom without a throne, where love is freedom, and freedom, at last, is real. Today when I look back, I don't see ruins. See roots. Every loss was a space cleared to plant something new. The memories of what we faced no longer wound me. They strengthened me. The empire that once raised me with cold hands fell on its feet, unaware it had been hollowed out long before. It crumbled from the outside, and the love that bloomed between Ezra and me with all its simplicity, its courage, its necessary madness, flourished where they said the soil was barren. We're remembered in textbooks, yes, but far more in the whispered conversations among young people who no longer want to obey out of obligation. We inspired, some say. But it wasn't inspiration that drove us. It was survival. It was the refusal to keep living a life that wasn't ours. The story many deemed a scandal became a symbol, and the kiss, that small explosive gesture, became collective memory. Not for being bold, but for being true. Because in that moment I stopped being a princess and started being free.